Hey guys, tonight we're curling up somewhere a little damp, a little smoky, and very, very old. Because you're about to time travel back to a Paleolithic shelter tucked between ancient trees and woolly mammoth tracks. It's dark. There's the gentle crackle of firewood and the rhythmic grinding of stone on grain. Somewhere a child sneezes and a dog-shaped creature stirs near your foot. The air smells like wet moss and old leather. And tonight's topic? Menstruation, pregnancy, and birth, long before heating pads or prenatal vitamins. You probably won't survive this, so before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your current location and local time in the comments. Seriously, it's always fun to see how global this sleepy tribe has become. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You crouch next to a woman whose hair is matted into thick, corded braids. She's chewing on something barky and not looking thrilled about it. Her stomach bulges. She's pregnant, probably near term. And beside her, another woman adjusts a wrap of dried moss tucked between her thighs. That's right, it's period care, Paleolithic style. No plastic applicators here, just whatever the forest offers. Moss, animal pelts, bundles of grass, maybe even crumpled tree bark. Early humans used what was absorbent, cleanish, and close at hand. You wonder if it itched. And what about cramps? You imagine chewing on bitter leaves or pressing warm stones to your belly, assuming you even had the luxury of complaining when survival took priority over comfort. It's hard to picture a formal day off in the middle of hunting and hide scraping. Still, some evidence suggests women in many hunter-gatherer societies likely synced menstruation with rest days, not as a spa retreat, but a chance to conserve energy and avoid predators who might sniff out blood. Romantic number, but oddly logical. Meanwhile, across the cave, a shaggy-haired man is carefully placing red ochre powder on a wall, sketching what might be a bison, or maybe a uterus? Historians still argue whether some of these red markings were ritualistic depictions of menstrual blood or purely artistic renderings. Either way, that rich red hue shows up a lot in early burial sites and fertility figurines, and you start to wonder, was blood, in a strange way, revered? And speaking of fertility, don't even get started on the iconic Venus figurines, those wide-hipped, large-breasted sculptures found from France to Siberia. Were they fertility totems, pregnancy charms, Stone Age body positivity icons? No one knows. But whoever carved them clearly paid attention to the parts of the body responsible for new life. And maybe comforted nervous mothers-to-be with a palm-sized promise. You are not alone. Others came before you. You shift, imagining childbirth in a cave. No epidural, no sterile instruments, just maybe a circle of women, some herbal poultices, and a fire you hope doesn't go out. One wrong twist, and the story ends early. Yet somehow, generation after generation, life went on. And here's the wild bit. Some archaeologists believe even prehistoric calendars may have been inspired by menstruation. The notches on bones like the 20,000-year-old Ishango bone could be a menstrual tracker. Or maybe it was tallying lunar cycle, but, which come to think of it, synced eerily well with monthly bleeds. The moon watched over everything, even your cramps. So you settle in next to your Paleolithic host, hearing the soft murmur of shared songs. Half lullaby, half warning. In the flickering firelight, ancient women carry wisdom passed not in books but by breath. A clump of moss, a bloody rag, a lullaby for the unborn. And through it all, a quiet, gritty kind of resilience. The kind that somehow survives. Even you. You shuffle along a dusty clay road, sandals kicking up warm puffs of dirt. The markets of ancient Sumer rise around you. Stacked mud brick houses, cries of vendors hawking barley beer and sheep's wool, and the low hum of prayers drifting from a nearby ziggurat. You pass women balancing jugs on their heads, and one slips a hand beneath her robe to adjust something discreetly. No modern pads here, just folded scraps of linen, maybe felted wool, or in a pinch, old rags tucked into place with string belts. Ancient Mesopotamian ingenuity at its most intimate. But periods weren't just a private annoyance. They were loaded with spiritual baggage. You overhear a priestess reciting a chant beside a flickering oil lamp. "O Ishtar, calm the flow, cleanse the womb." It's a little spooky, a little soothing. Blood, after all, was considered sacred and dangerous, at once life-giving and taboo. Historians still argue whether these incantations were intended to stop heavy flow or to protect women from spirits supposedly drawn to menstrual blood. Either way, it was clear. The gods were involved in your uterus. And when pregnancy was the goal? Well, that's where things get clay heavy. You duck into a low-lit shrine filled with small, wide-eyed figurines, fertility idols. Some are just lumps with breasts. Others cradle round bellies or squat in mid-birth. These weren't just decorations. Women prayed to them, rubbed their bellies for luck, and placed them under their pillows. Think of them as Sumerian vision boards, but with more baked clay and less Pinterest. Now you're standing near a healer's hut, the air thick with the scent of crushed herbs and animal fat. A woman hands you a wedge of dried fig, but it's not a snack, it's part of a pregnancy spell. You blink. Really? Yes. One common test was soaking cloth in oil, inserting it into the woman, and checking how it smelled the next day. Supposedly, the aroma revealed fertility status. Another test? Urine poured on barley and wheat seeds. If they sprouted quickly, congratulations, you were pregnant. If not, well, back to the idol shelf. And the cravings. Oh, the cravings. You watch a very pregnant woman gleefully munching on clay. Not some trendy detox clay, but the kind scraped from riverbanks and sun-dried. Geophagy, the technical term, might have provided minerals. Or maybe it just soothed morning sickness. We'll never really know, but hey, who are we to judge ancient cravings? You've probably eaten cereal at midnight, haven't you? As you move through the marketplace, something else catches your eye. A group of women painting tiny clay tablets with wedge-shaped cuneiform. These are not just business records. They include spells and medical advice. One tablet lists a mix of crushed snakeskin and honey to soothe labor pains. Another promises fertility after bathing in beer and sleeping near a goat. You raise an eyebrow. Is this early science or wishful thinking? Maybe both. Historians still debate whether Sumerian medicine was rooted in observation or magic. Spoiler, it was probably a murky mix. The birthing process? Imagine a cramped room, a low stool with a hole, and women squatting while gripping woven ropes hung from the ceiling. Midwives bark orders, toss herbs into the air, and slap cold cloths onto sweating faces. It's chaotic, but weirdly efficient. You feel the tension build, then release and hear a wail. No shiny baby wipes, no epidurals. Just salt water, determination, and a whole lot of yelling. Then the placenta is wrapped in cloth and buried under the threshold of the home. A practice believed to protect both mother and child. 1 foot inside the world, 1 foot still in the divine. You step back into the golden sun, the voices of clay idol worshippers and barley sprout watchers fading behind you. The scent of date syrup wafts by, and someone plays a reed flute. In a world of mud walls and moon cycles, the rhythms of womanhood remain oddly familiar. Hopeful, messy, sacred, and a little ridiculous. And just like that, you move on. You drift gently down the Nile, warm wind in your face. Papyrus reeds rustling like whispers from the gods. In the distance, pyramids rise like dreams on the horizon. But tonight, your focus is smaller, more domestic. Inside a mud brick home shaded with palm fronds, a woman adjusts a strip of fine linen. It's tucked snugly like a tampon, held in place with practiced ease. Ancient Egyptian women weren't just masters of eyeliner. They knew a thing or two about menstrual care. Yes, linen tampons. Thin strips of fabric, softened and rolled, sometimes soaked in resin or medicinal herbs. This wasn't some fringe practice either. Papyrus medical texts like the Ebers Papyrus describe numerous gynecological remedies, including treatments for excessive bleeding from the womb. You picture an apothecary with shelves of dried crocodile dung, myrrh, and juniper berries. If it smells like a cursed incense shop, you're doing it right. Nearby, a midwife crushes something with a pestle. She's mixing dates, barley, and, wait, old crocodile dung. Yup, that infamous contraceptive mixture which some women packed into linen and wore internally. Historians still argue whether it worked by changing pH levels or simply scaring away potential partners. Either way, ancient birth control was bold, and probably itchy. You enter a different home, where a woman eyes you warily. She's drinking beer, not for fun, but for science. The Egyptians had a pregnancy test. Urinate on barley and emmer wheat over several days. If the seed sprouted, congratulations, baby on board. No sprouts? Probably not pregnant. Modern studies even suggest it had some accuracy, which is more than can be said for peeing on a stick in 1350 BCE. You pass a wall painting of the goddess Tawere, a fierce hippo with lion paws and a swollen belly. She guards birth and pregnancy, snarling away evil. You chuckle softly. Who wouldn't want a hippo goddess at their side during labor? Statues of her were common in homes and birthing rooms, often placed near headboards or painted on amulets. You imagine holding one in your hand, worn smooth from anxious thumbs. Now you're in a birthing chamber, narrow and dim, yet bustling with movement. Midwives help a woman squat on a special birthing stool, 2 supports with a gap in the middle. Beneath her, sand is ready to absorb the mess. There's chanting, palm wine, maybe a protective spell scratched into the wall. Labor here is noisy and sacred, and communal. The entire neighborhood probably hears it. One woman massages the laboring mother's back with the scented oils. Another fans her with ostrich feathers. Birth is a moment when human and divine meet, and nobody's taking that lightly. They even had charms shaped like knives to ward off demons, which feels overkill until you remember there were no C-sections here. Just grit, breath, and hope. After birth, the baby is rubbed with salt and herbs, then swaddled in linen and placed in a reed basket, not just for floating down rivers, but for warmth and security. And the placenta? That goes into a clay pot, buried near the house to ensure spiritual protection. You marvel again at how universal some instincts are. Wrap the baby, bury the afterbirth, say a prayer. Later, in the cool courtyard, you overhear women trading advice on when to conceive. Some believe certain days of the lunar calendar are more fertile. Others claim crocodile-shaped amulets help. One older woman insists papyrus soaked in honey works better than any god. It's part science, part folklore, and all taken seriously. And yet, even in this advanced civilization, menstruation was cloaked in taboo. Temple priests barred bleeding women from sacred spaces. Some papyri describe menstruation as a wound needing healing. You sigh. Even in a world that worshipped fertility goddesses, periods still made people uncomfortable. But you can't help smiling as you watch a girl sneak a small bundle of linen into her tunic, eyes gleaming with mischief and knowledge. She's part of a lineage older than the pyramids, of women helping women, whispering wisdom through time. The boat rocks gently. You hear the Nile lapping against reeds. Crocodiles drift past, blissfully unaware of their role in the contraceptive industry. The stars blink above, steady and unbothered. And the story flows on. You settle into a cushioned lounge chair on a sun-drenched Greek veranda. Olive trees cast flickering shadows across the marble tiles, and a soft breeze carries the scent of thyme and baked figs. Somewhere in the distance, a lyre strums a lazy tune. You're surrounded by the thinkers of ancient Greece, Plato, Hippocrates, and a handful of physicians convinced your uterus is on the move. No, really. According to Greek medicine, the womb was considered a wandering organ. It could meander around your body like a lost puppy, causing everything from hysteria to shortness of breath to spontaneous fainting spells. You glance down, half expecting your uterus to make a break for your throat. Thankfully, you're reclining. Hippocrates, often hailed as the father of medicine, believed that the womb needed regular release through intercourse, childbirth, or menstruation, or it would become distressed and wander. This belief wasn't fringe, it was mainstream. Historians still argue whether the theory was a metaphor, a mistranslation, or just plain panic in a toga. You watch as a young woman is handed a warm poultice made of garlic, myrrh, and rose oil, pressed against her abdomen to lure her womb back into place. Another woman is being fumigated, yes, literally, by sitting over burning herbs designed to calm the rebellious uterus. The line between gynecology and ghost-busting is blurrier than you'd think. Periods were seen as both purifying and problematic. Bloodletting of the uterus, if you will. If a woman missed her period, she was said to be blocked, and treatments included herbs to provoke bleeding, or worse, drastic dietary changes. You sip a theoretical cup of olive oil and fish sauce and try not to gag. Contraception? Surprisingly advanced. Pessaries, soft suppositories made from wool soaked in cedar oil or pomegranate juice, were used to block or kill sperm. Some women also drank concoctions of silphium, a now extinct plant from Cyrene known for its contraceptive properties. It was so valued it appeared on coins. Imagine minting money with your favorite birth control on it. Still, pregnancy was no picnic. Midwives, known as mayai, were respected professionals, often women with years of experience but no formal schooling. They guided labor using chants, massage, and copious amounts of olive oil. You peek into a birthing room, sparse but calm. A woman grips a support rope while squatting over a clay bowl. Her sister rubs her back, whispering words meant to distract more than comfort. Birth was considered both sacred and civic. A successful delivery meant another citizen for the polis, a new warrior or weaver for the state. Infants were bathed in warm wine or water, then presented to the father for approval. Not approval like a baby fashion show, more like checking for deformities. If deemed unfit, the child might be exposed, left in a public place or wilderness to die or be adopted. You shiver. Even here, amid all this philosophy and poetry, life begins with risk. Still, love and care were abundant. Mothers wore amulets of Artemis, goddess of childbirth, and burned incense in her temples. You trail your fingers along a wall carving of Artemis holding a child. Even gods, it seems, needed backup during labor. Back on the veranda, you hear laughter. A group of women pass around a scroll titled Diseases of Women. It's part medical text, part gossip column. One line suggests sneezing as a post-intercourse contraceptive method. You chuckle, imagining an ancient woman shouting, "Achoo!" with strategic urgency. And while the men debated anatomy with their inaccurate diagrams, women shared real knowledge, passed down in kitchens, over laundry basins, and by torchlight. Midwives, mothers, sisters, they knew what the philosophers didn't. So, as the sun sets and the olives glisten, you recline and realize. Even in a world where wombs were wayward and figs were fertility symbols, people still managed to get through it. Bleeding, birthing, worrying, and whispering, same as ever. You weave through the bustling streets of ancient Rome, the sun warm on your back, and the smell of grilled fish hanging heavy in the air. Marble columns cast long shadows over the cobbled lanes, where women in stolas hurry past with baskets of herbs, cosmetics, and something more intimate, remedies and tools for managing their monthly cycles and fertility. Welcome to the world of Roman reproductive wisdom, where mint tea meets military efficiency. You duck into a shaded courtyard where two women are steeping herbs. One is crushing pennyroyal, an herb used as both a menstrual regulator and contraceptive, though in high doses it could be dangerously toxic. The other stirs a mixture of olive oil and wool, You squint. Is that a DIY tampon? Pretty much. Roman women often used wool pessaries soaked in astringents or antiseptics, like vinegar, wine, or even garlic. Because nothing says romance like garlic-soaked birth control. You pass a booth where an herbalist whispers to a nervous young wife. She's offered a scroll with a recipe involving myrtle, saffron, and honey to stabilize the womb. The directions are vague, the confidence immense. Historians still argue whether these prescriptions were based on experience, superstition, or simply the placebo effect wrapped in papyrus. Nearby, a statue of Juno Luxana, goddess of childbirth, stands guard over a household shrine. Women light incense and offer fresh fruit, praying for easy labor and healthy babies. Unlike many ancient cultures, Roman women were somewhat more visible in medical texts, especially through the writings of Cyrenus, a physician who wrote a 4-volume work called Gynecology. You imagine him like a calm-voiced YouTube OBGYN, minus the HD visuals. His instructions, surprisingly practical. He advised against over-tight clothing, recommended exercise during pregnancy, and even described the stages of labor in detail. Though some advice, like having your pregnant wife gently shaken to reposition the fetus, raises an eyebrow or two. You glance nervously at the marble columns, hoping none are about to start wiggling babies into place. As for periods, they were both a biological necessity and a cultural burden. Elite women might stay indoors during their cycle, while lower-class women powered through, likely with wool pads or cloths changed frequently during the workday. Roman society didn't have our vocabulary for PMS, but crankiness was definitely noted. One Roman joke book references, "The wrath of a woman best left alone." You wander into a villa kitchen, where a matron is boiling something on a brazier. It's a blend of pomegranate rind and lentil flour used as a contraceptive paste. It's smeared inside with fingers or on a sponge. Another woman mutters about using a leather pouch filled with peppercorns. You don't ask where that's going, of course. Not all Roman ideas aged well. One popular belief held that drinking the urine of a she-mule could increase fertility. Another involved tying weasel testicles around your neck. You try not to make eye contact with the roasted weasel on a vendor's tray. Pregnancy itself was often fraught. You peek into a bedroom where a laboring woman grips two midwives by the wrists. She's on a birthing chair, similar to modern squat stools, while the attendants chant quietly, dabbing her forehead with water and giving her tiny sips of wine. No anesthesia here, just prayer, endurance, and maybe a distraction in the form of flute music or a ceremonial chicken. After birth, the baby is swaddled tightly, sometimes so tightly that it resembled a bread loaf in bandages. The umbilical cord is cut with a bronze blade, the stump dabbed with wine or salt, and the mother is given a thick barley porridge to rebuild her strength. Placenta burial varied. Some burned it, some buried it near thresholds, others just tossed it in the Tiber. You wince at that last one. And yes, there were baby exposés here too. Romans practiced expositio, leaving unwanted infants in public places. But it wasn't always doom. Some children were taken in by others, even raised as household servants or adopted heirs. Still, it casts a long shadow on the birth rituals you've just witnessed. As you exit the villa, a young woman walks past wearing a leather charm pouch around her neck. Inside, likely a tiny carving of Venus, a sprig of rue, and maybe, just maybe, a pinch of dried wolf liver. You smile. No matter how advanced the roads or columns, some parts of life stayed deeply, deliciously weird. You stroll down a forest path where the morning mist curls around towering banyan trees and the air smells like sandalwood and rain-soaked earth. Welcome to ancient India, a land where the body was mapped not with scalpels, but with energy, balance, and rhythm. And as you step into a quiet village courtyard, the soft sound of bells and the buzz of grinding stone invite you into a world where menstruation, pregnancy, and birth were managed by the cosmos. A young woman squats by a fire, sipping warm ghee stirred with jaggery and fennel. This isn't just comfort food. According to Ayurveda, India's ancient system of medicine, what you eat, think, and breathe all influence your reproductive health. You feel the warmth of the hearth, the grounding pull of spices in the air, and start to understand. Here, cycles aren't disruptions. They're flows to be harmonized. Menstruation was called Rajaswala, the time of the Rajasic flow. Women were often encouraged to rest, not out of shame, but to conserve energy and cleanse the body. Some texts prescribed isolation, but this didn't always mean exile. It could be a pause, a moment for introspection and warmth, like a built-in monthly retreat. Though, of course, how soothing this was depended on who you were and how your family viewed such practices. Historians still argue whether this was empowering self-care or a gentle form of social exclusion. As for menstrual care, cloth pads were common, washed, sun-dried, reused. You watch a grandmother boiling neem leaves and soaking cotton in them, explaining their antimicrobial properties. No plastics, no perfumed wrappers, just generations of whispered remedies and lunar tracking. Some women used ash or dried grass, while others bled freely on old cloths, reserved only for this purpose. You pass a temple where statues of Shakti, the divine feminine force, stand radiant and blood-free. But you know better now. That power is cyclical, bleeding, enduring. Offerings of red hibiscus flowers hint at it. The women sitting outside, humming mantras while grinding turmeric, embody it. And when it came to fertility, ancient Indian texts overflowed with advice, rituals, and herbal aids. Ayurveda viewed the body like a field. If the soil is dry or poorly prepared, the seed won't take. You watch a woman rub sesame oil into her abdomen while whispering prayers. Another drinks warm milk with saffron and ashwagandha. And a third performs a quiet yoga sequence, focused on breath and pelvic movement. It's oddly modern, and yet over 2,000 years old. You slip inside a healer's home where scrolls line the walls. There's mention of Garbhadana, a sacred conception ceremony practiced in some traditions to bless the union before life even begins. Other scrolls list herbs, shatavari for womb strength, aloe vera for regulating flow, and banyan root for fertility. It's science, faith, and gardening rolled into one. Pregnancy, once achieved, was treated like a sacred contract. A pregnant woman was encouraged to avoid harsh sounds, violent sights, and spicy foods that could disrupt the fetus. She recited verses, listened to flutes, and smelled jasmine. One woman hums softly while tying a thread around her belly, a ritual to shield the unborn child from bad energy. Superstition or early psychology? Hard to say, but calming either way. And then, birth. You arrive in a darkened room lit with sesame oil lamps. A woman grips two thick ropes hung from a ceiling beam while squatting over soft earth. The midwife applies warm compresses and chants mantras to soothe the labor pains. There's oil, incense, and the faint rustle of neem branches placed near the doorway to ward off spirits. A bowl of turmeric water waits to anoint the newborn. The moment arrives with a cry, not of panic, but release. The baby is caught, wiped gently, and swaddled in soft cotton. The cord is cut with a bronze blade sterilized over fire, then the stump dusted with powdered herbs. The placenta, buried under a tulsi plant, a sacred spot, life feeding life. You watch as the new mother is massaged head to toe with warm oils, her 40-day recovery period known as Suthika Parikarya. She's fed ghee-laden meals, spoken to softly, and given time to rebuild her inner fire. This isn't indulgence, it's medicine. A slow return to balance. Outside, the moon hangs low. A girl squats with a chalkboard, calculating her cycle using the lunar calendar. Her grandmother nods approvingly, offering her a bracelet of red beads to track the days. It's quiet, intimate, and strangely timeless. In a world where even the body bowed to rhythm and ritual, the flow of blood was never random. It was a map, a cycle, a chant etched in the softest parts of the soul. You step into a perfumed breeze within the high, red lacquered walls of the imperial palace. The silken hush of slippered feet on polished wood, the quiet murmur of courtiers, and the soft tinkling of wind chimes overhead tell you you're in ancient China and you're about to uncover the intricate rituals and remedies surrounding periods, pregnancy, and birth behind the dragon-guarded gates. Here in the Forbidden City, every detail matters, from the thread count of your robe to the shape of your tea leaves. And when it came to women's health, especially for empresses and concubines, nothing was left to chance. You pass a chamber where a royal physician is consulting an astrological chart, muttering about yin excess and kuai imbalance. In traditional Chinese medicine, health was harmony, and menstruation was a monthly readout of your inner energies. You listen as he recommends mugwort tea and cinnamon bark to regulate flow, and dried peach pit to ease cramps. These weren't just homespun remedies. They were systematically recorded in texts like the Treatise on Cold Damage. Still, historians argue whether these treatments were empirically effective or simply the result of centuries of poetic speculation and trial and error herbalism. Either way, it smells earthy. Elite women used silk pads for menstruation, finely layered and washed with care by handmaidens. Common women often use scraps of cloth or even dried grass stuffed into little pouches. And in colder regions, heated bricks wrapped in linen were pressed to the belly during cramps, a precursor to our beloved heating pads. You pause, warming your hands near one such brick, grateful for some old-school self-care. In the imperial quarters, you notice red strings tied around wrists and tiny jade amulets resting on belly buttons, tokens of protection during pregnancy. Concubines hoping for favor consumed carefully balanced meals rich in sesame, millet, and medicinal broths brewed with angelica root, believed to nourish the blood. It's like an ancient prenatal smoothie, minus the blender. When a woman became pregnant, her every move was monitored. No sharp objects, no sour foods, no bad news. Even laughter was considered risky if too vigorous. You eavesdrop as a court lady reads poetry to a pregnant empress, voice slow and smooth like river water. It's all about keeping the fetus peaceful. You picture prenatal yoga, but with more silk robes and fewer downward dogs. As for predicting the baby's gender, midwives inspected belly shape, skin tone, and even the dream content of the mother. A dream of pomegranates. Girl, tigers? Definitely a boy. Science? Not quite. But the excitement was real. You're led to the Tai Fang, a private birthing room, shielded from spirits and gossip alike. Here a woman labors on a woven mat, gripping a wooden pole fixed into the floor. Her attendants chant softly, one brushing her hair rhythmically, another feeding her spoonfuls of rice porridge. Birch bark is burned in the corner, and dried orange peel floats in hot water, ready to soothe the new mother post-birth. The birth is intense but calm, like a storm in slow motion. The baby arrives with a gasp and a wail. A midwife wipes the child with silk, then paints a red dot on its forehead. The cord is tied with red string and cut with jade, symbolizing purity and long life. You watch as the placenta is dried and stored in a special jar. In some households, it was later consumed as a soup. You try not to blink too hard at that. Postpartum recovery, known as Zuo Yuezi, sitting the month, is almost a ceremony. The new mother is tucked into bed and not allowed to leave it for 30 to 40 days. No cold water, no wind, and definitely no washing her hair. She's fed warming foods, sesame oil chicken, fish soup, and sweetened rice wine. Even now, many Chinese families uphold parts of this practice, though whether it's soothing or stifling often depends on how many aunties are involved. You leave the birthing chamber as incense curls around your ankles. Outside, a child plays with a paper lantern shaped like a rabbit. Her mother calls her in gently. It's time for a nap. You watch the child clutch a tiny pouch of dried herbs, stitched into a rabbit-shaped charm. It jingles faintly with each step, a safeguard for a child of the palace. Beneath the stone dragons and painted beams, you feel it, the same patterns repeating. Flow, fear, hope, ritual. A society ruled by emperors, but shaped quietly, powerfully by the rhythms of women's bodies. You blink against the brightness of the African savanna, where acacia trees stretch across the horizon like dancers frozen mid-sway. Birds call overhead, their cries mingling with distant voices carried on the wind. A gentle trail leads you into a village compound surrounded by woven fences and thick red earth. Here, in communities across pre-colonial Africa, traditions surrounding menstruation, pregnancy, and birth are as rooted as the baobab trees themselves. You duck beneath a thatched roof and enter a birth hut, modest, round, and cool. This is where women gather, not just to give birth, but to bleed, heal, and reconnect with the rhythms of their own bodies. These huts exist in many African cultures and go by different names, but they share a common purpose: a space for women to tend to women. Not exile, but sanctuary. Inside, it's quiet and shadowy. A pot of herbal steam bubbles gently in the center, releasing the rich scent of lemongrass and clove. A girl, no older than 16, sits cross-legged, watching her older cousin prepare mugwiti, a herbal blend used to ease menstrual discomfort. She learns by watching, listening. In this world, knowledge is oral, rhythmic, embodied. You feel it as you sit on the earth floor. Healing passed through laughter, sighs, and song. Period care varies by region and resource. Some women use soft bark, others layers of cloth, banana fiber, or even handmade pads woven from reeds. In drier climates, absorbent clay mixed with ash is used to stop chafing and keep things clean. It sounds uncomfortable, but you marvel at the ingenuity. These materials were natural, biodegradable, and, in many cases, surprisingly effective. Historians still debate the use of such materials. Were they widespread? Limited by climate? We may never know for sure, but they existed in harmony with the landscape. When a girl gets her first period, there's often a ritual, some celebratory, others solemn. In some Bantu communities, girls are secluded for days, taught by older women about sex, marriage, childbirth, and how to manage bleeding with dignity. There's singing, beating, even dance. You hear laughter rising from another hut. A girl just emerged from her seclusion, hair braided, arms painted with ochre, eyes bright. She is now, quite officially, a woman. And when that woman becomes pregnant, a whole new cycle begins. Pregnancy is not a solo event. It's a community watch. Elders track cravings, interpret dreams, and chant softly over the growing belly. Some believe the sex of the child can be predicted by how high the mother carries. Others watch whether she laughs more, eats more, or sleeps facing west. There's herbal guidance too. Morgo leaves to build blood, bambra beans for energy, and aloe to ease swelling. The flavors are strong, but the purpose is stronger. You watch a woman soak in a warm baobab bath. She hums to her unborn child, her hands gliding gently over her belly. It's not superstition, it's a bond. Some cultures believe talking to the baby shapes its soul. You think of modern parents playing Mozart to their bumps and smile. Not so different after all. Birth itself is a communal act. The mother squats on folded hides while women gather around, singing in call and response. The midwife, often an elder who has attended dozens of births, uses tools passed down through generations: a smooth bone comb for the hair, an amulet of cowrie shells, and always her hands. No sterile gloves, no machines, just intuition, tradition, and presence. When the baby arrives, it is rubbed with shea butter and massaged carefully to straighten limbs and calm the spirit. A naming ceremony often follows where the child's first cry, time of birth, or even weather might influence the chosen name. The placenta, wrapped in cloth and buried beneath a tree, often the same tree the mother rested under during labor. Later, you see the new mother lying beside a fire, sipping warm millet porridge laced with ginger. Her mother feeds her slowly, stroking her forehead. Postpartum care here is serious business. Women are given time to heal, encouraged to stay warm, eat well, and rest for weeks. In some cultures, the baby is not seen by men or strangers for a full month, a period of bonding and recovery. You breathe in the smoke and herbs and feel the pace of life slow. As night falls, the drumming begins. Not wild, not celebratory, just a gentle rhythm, steady and low. You follow the sound and find a gathering of women. They're painting each other's feet with henna, whispering stories about their first blood, first love, first labor. You sit quietly in the circle, a stranger welcomed. And as the stars brighten above and the fire cracks softly, you realize this is not just about managing bodies. It's about remembering, repeating, rejoining the long, long thread of women who have bled, birthed, and begun again beneath this same sky. You now walk carefully along the polished stones of a floating causeway, mist rising around the feathered steps of a distant temple. Welcome to the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan, where moon calendars hang in the stars and corn grows in the lake. Here, blood is more than biology. It is sacred. It nourishes gods, seasons, even cities. And that makes menstruation, pregnancy, and childbirth powerful, mystical, and at times, dangerous affairs. You pass women carrying baskets of nixtamal and bundles of dyed cotton. One disappears into a quiet corner of the courtyard, where she sits, adjusting a small cloth square nestled in her cuitul, a traditional skirt. These pads, often made of tightly woven cotton or layered maguey fibers, were washed and reused. Not luxurious, but resilient, like the women who wore them. In the Aztec world, menstruation was called metzli itztic, moon's bleeding. A phrase as poetic as it was practical. You duck into a round thatched hut, warm with the scent of roasted cocoa and sweet maize. A group of women hum gently, grinding blue corn and whispering stories. One girl giggles as she's given her first menstrual wrap, painted with tiny flowers. In many Mesoamerican cultures, menarche was marked with quiet pride. Not public pageantry, but sacred observation. A new moon, a new beginning. Yet this power carried social consequences. During their cycles, some women were restricted from entering temples or participating in certain rituals. Blood was sacred but also feared, a duality common in ancient cultures. Historians still debate whether this exclusion was symbolic protection or coded shame. Likely both. You sip a thick chocolate drink spiced with chili and wonder, not for the first time, how many cultures could hold so many contradictions in a single cup. When it came to fertility, the gods were always listening. You visit a shrine to Tlazolteotl, goddess of purification and midwives. Her statues are earthy, abundant, often depicted giving birth herself. Offerings of cacao beans, obsidian, and corn are laid before her. Women seeking pregnancy might leave intricate paper effigies, crafted with the same focus and care as a modern vision board, except these ones flutter in temple fires. Pregnant women were treated with reverence. Elders read their dreams for omens. If you dreamed of maize, it meant abundance. If you dreamed of fire, it foretold a difficult labor. They were fed rich atole, thick with amaranth and honey, and sometimes wore belts woven with sacred symbols to tie in the life forming within. You run your fingers along one of these belts hanging from a drying rack. It's warm not just from the sun, but from the echoes of 1,000 hopes whispered into it. And labor? It was a battle. No, really. In Aztec culture, childbirth was literally a spiritual war. Women in labor were likened to warriors. If they died during delivery, they earned the same status as those fallen in combat. Their spirits were believed to rise with the sun, fierce and honored. You watch as a laboring mother grips wooden handles, knees bent, hair braided tightly back. Around her, midwives chant protection spells, burn copal incense, and massage her hips with warm stones. When the baby comes, it is greeted not just with cloth and milk, but with ritual. Some babies were held to the 4 cardinal directions, bathed with ash and given names based on the calendar. Placental burial was precise. A boy's under the battlefield shrine, a girl's near the hearth. Even where you placed the afterbirth spoke of destiny. Midwives, or Tlamatlquitaycatl, were revered as both doctors and spiritual guides. They memorized generations of herbal lore using yarrow to stop bleeding, marigold to ease pain, and cacao leaves to warm the womb. After delivery, the mother rested on woven mats, wrapped in tilmas soaked with warm herbal infusions, sometimes for days, sometimes for a sacred cycle of 13. You crouch beside one such mother as her midwife rubs her feet with cornmeal and whispers lullabies over the child in her arms. And the child? Already part of the larger story. From birth, they were steeped in cosmology. Every cough, hiccup, or restless sleep was a sign, an echo of the god's breath. The home itself became a temple filled with symbols, carvings, and the ever-watchful eyes of ancestors painted on the walls. Outside, the sun slips lower over Lake Texcoco. Floating gardens, chinampas, shimmer in the fading light. A girl runs past with red paint on her cheeks and a bundle of cotton pads in her hand. Life here is rhythmic, mythic, circular. Birth and blood feed the city just as surely as water feeds the corn. And as the moon rises, full and quiet, you realize these were not just rites of the body. They were stories, embedded in blood and breath, lived over and over until they shaped a civilization. You duck into the chill stone corridor of a medieval monastery, candlelight flickering against worn icons and tightly closed shutters. Somewhere nearby, a monk chants psalms, his voice rising like incense into the rafters. But your attention is drawn elsewhere, to the low hum of conversation behind a wooden door marked with an iron cross. You press your ear close. Inside, a group of nuns are discussing something practical, whispered and entirely human. Bleeding, birthing, and the stubborn weight of being a woman in the Middle Ages. You slip into the room where soft wool robes swish over rush-covered floors. One nun, an older woman with surprisingly strong hands, is drying strips of linen over a fire. These will be used again, washed, blessed, and dried in sunlight whenever possible. In convents, where women often handled their own medical care, menstrual cloths were part of a quiet system of dignity. Outside these walls, the story was less kind. In broader medieval Europe, menstruation was heavily wrapped in superstition. Some believed it was a natural form of purging. Others claimed menstrual blood could sour wine, kill crops, and dull mirrors. You blink. What does a mirror have to do with anything? Nobody knows. But you quickly learn not to question medieval logic too deeply. The church was especially wary of menstruation. Women on their periods were often barred from communion and warned against touching holy objects. And yet, paradoxically, saints' bodies, often female, were revered for bleeding without cause, known as miraculous stigmata. So, menstrual blood was bad, unless it was miraculous. Historians still argue how much of this was theology and how much was just a lack of plumbing. You walk into a village apothecary's hut, ducking under bundles of drying lavender and rosemary. The midwife here is respected, though not entirely trusted. She straddles a strange line between healer and heretic. She boils raspberry leaves for cramps, mixes mugwort and fennel for regulating flow, and wears a charm, a tiny bone wrapped in red thread, said to protect her from womb sickness. You ask no questions. When a woman became pregnant, the whispers began. Pregnancy was seen as divine and dangerous, a gift from God, yes, but also a time of heightened vulnerability to sin, demons, and too much garlic. You watch a pregnant woman hang a tiny wax figure above her bed and murmur prayers to St. Margaret of Antioch, the go-to patron saint of childbirth. Legend says she once survived being swallowed by a dragon. You figure if anyone can protect a woman during labor, it's her. Inside a peasant's cottage, you find a woman preparing for birth. She grips a linen rope tied from the ceiling and squats over clean hay. A fire crackles nearby. Its warmth is thought to drive off evil spirits. Midwives boil water, not to sterilize instruments, but to warm cloths and soothe aches. Cleanliness, as we know it, isn't quite a concept yet. A birth stool is brought forward, three-legged, low, and curved. You touch it gently, surprised by how smooth it is from years of use. The mother labors as chants rise in Latin. No painkillers here, just prayers, herbal tinctures, and grit. When the baby arrives, the midwife checks the cord, wraps the child, and delivers a firm slap. Not cruelty, but encouragement for a first breath. Postpartum care is basic. The new mother is given broth, bed rest, and sometimes even leeches if the physician suspects bad humors. Her bleeding is observed for signs of imbalance. If the blood is too dark, she may be bled further. You glance nervously at the jars of leeches and step back. Then there's the churching ceremony, a public blessing for women returning to society after childbirth. It's both reintegration and a subtle acknowledgement that she was somehow unclean during her ordeal. You watch as a young mother kneels at the church entrance, holding her baby and waiting to be let back into the world. But not everything was bleak. Women shared knowledge through herbals. Manuscripts like the Trotula, a 12th century guide to female health written by and for women. You see one such copy, pages smudged with thumbprints and annotated with tiny crosses. Remedies for swollen feet, bleeding gums, even instructions on how to reposition a breech baby using gentle massage and patient hands. A kind of medieval wisdom passed down in kitchens, gardens, and midnight vigils. Outside, the wind picks up. A girl wraps her cloak tighter, pressing a small linen bundle to her side. She's just begun her cycle. There are no announcements, no celebrations, just a quiet understanding, a nod from her mother, and perhaps a whispered prayer to St. Bridget. And in the hush of this dark, drafty century, you feel it again, that same pattern. In spite of superstition, despite shame, the work of bleeding and birthing carried on. In cottages and convents, over cauldrons and crosses, whispered from midwife to mother, woman to girl. The night deepens, the bells toll softly, and the story does not end. You step into a richly perfumed chamber, lined with tapestries and flickering candelabras. The Renaissance has arrived. Part curiosity cabinet, part salon, where art, science, and superstition flirt with each other in powdered wigs and velvet slippers. Tonight, you're in a villa in Florence, and the conversation isn't about frescoes or trade routes. It's about the whispered world of ladies' secrets, coded letters, fertility spells, and carefully guarded recipes tucked into silver lockets and herbal journals. A noblewoman in a brocade gown leans over a mahogany writing desk, her quill scratching out a letter to a friend in Venice. The topic? Not politics or suitors, but a recipe for easing monthly cramps using wine, saffron, and a mysterious powder known only as the golden salt. This is how information spreads now, quietly, elegantly, with flourishes and coded phrases. You could be reading about a love potion or a menstrual remedy, or both. You glance at a folded vellum tucked under a candlestick. It's part of a Liber Secreta Mulierum, a book of women's secrets. These texts, based loosely on classical sources and deeply spiced with medieval superstition, outline everything from how to determine a fetus's sex, tie a lodestone to a thread and dangle it over the belly, to how to ensure a quick labor. Bathe in chamomile, say 3 Hail Marys, and eat a poached pear. Historians still argue whether these books were genuine medical tools or fanciful housewife curiosities. Probably both. Menstruation during the Renaissance is still a complex subject. One foot in Galenic humoral theory, the other in folk wisdom. Women were believed to expel excess humors through bleeding, making periods not just natural, but medically necessary. But too much bleeding. That could signal imbalance, not enough. Equally dangerous. You sip a warm clove infusion and thank modern medicine. Menstrual rags are now finer. Layers of linen or wool, often embroidered discreetly to distinguish them from household cloths. Some wealthy women had them scented with rosewater or stored in cedarwood boxes to ward off moths. Even your period kit had to look chic. Contraception, as always, danced between herbology and hearsay. You peek into a kitchen where a servant simmers a syrup of rue, myrtle, and vinegar, a bitter draught taken in secret. Another room holds a small figurine of St. Catherine wrapped in red ribbon. It's meant to tie the womb against unwanted conception. You wonder how many of these remedies worked and how many simply gave their users a comforting sense of control. Pregnancy was still treacherous. Noble women might be confined to bed for months, kept on strict diets of soft bread, milk, and carefully spiced stews. Some believed a woman's mood shaped her unborn child. See a beautiful painting? Your baby might be lovely. Stumble upon a rat? Well, better burn some sage and hope for the best. You step into a birthing room, sunlight slanting across tapestries embroidered with mythic scenes. Venus rising, Gaia nursing newborns. The mother, pale and sweating, grips silken bedsheets while a midwife rubs her belly with lavender oil. A priest waits quietly nearby, ready to offer last rites if things turn grim. Not morbid, just realistic. Even among the rich, maternal mortality loomed like a shadow over every cradle. When the child arrives, the midwife swaddles it and places a touch of honey on the lips. The cord is tied with red silk, then clipped with silver shears. A special cushion embroidered with the family crest is placed under the newborn, as if nobility should be introduced from the first breath. Baptism follows swiftly, often within hours, just in case. The baby's name is whispered 3 times, then recorded in the family ledger. You run your hand over one such book, fingers catching on the flourished M of Maria, born to a merchant's daughter in 1548. Her mother wrote her birth story in the margins. Postpartum care is both gentle and intense. Herbal broths, lace-wrapped compresses, even music played to balance the womb. One scholar recommended lute music and readings from Virgil. Another more practically suggested boiled nettle water. And no visits from mother-in-laws for 40 days. You find yourself nodding in agreement. Outside in the lemon-scented garden, 2 women trade letters. One mentions a clever Dutch cloth that does not leak. The other nods knowingly. Across Europe, innovations were slowly seeping in. Cloth pads with ties, tighter undergarments to hold them in place, and the first inklings of structured postpartum support among the elite. You watch as a young girl peeks out from behind a lace curtain. She's just reached her menarche and wears a tiny pendant of the Virgin Mary. Her governess gives her a wrapped parcel. Linen pads, a sprig of rosemary, and a folded note with advice in looping script. She reads it silently, then tucks it into her bodice. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just another girl entering a centuries-old lineage of quiet, steady resilience. The sun dips behind the terracotta roofs of Florence. A bell tolls softly, and you, nestled in the scent of rose oil and iron-rich herbs, begin to realize. In these letters, linens, and lullabies, women have written a hidden history of care. Inked in secrets, stitched in silence. You catch your breath as a stiff gust of wind billows your skirts and nearly knocks off your bonnet. You've arrived in Victorian England, where everything smells faintly of coal smoke, lavender, and unrealistic expectations. Here, propriety is everything, except when it comes to fainting spells, nervous disorders, and corset-related reproductive struggles. And beneath the starched lace and moral rigidity, women are quietly navigating menstruation, pregnancy, and birth with equal parts discretion and desperation. You're ushered into a genteel sitting room, where the fire crackles politely and tea is perpetually lukewarm. A woman reclines on a fainting couch, one hand pressed to her temple, the other clutching a lace handkerchief. Women's troubles, they call it. Not cramps, not menstruation. Certainly not blood. Just troubles. You sit beside her, trying not to wrinkle the antimacassar, and wonder how anyone survived this century with their sanity intact. Menstruation in the Victorian era was cloaked in euphemism. The curse. Nature's monthly visitor. Your time. It's as if society collectively agreed that if you didn't name it, maybe it wouldn't exist. Yet behind closed doors, women kept detailed diaries tracking their cycles. Linen rags and flannel cloths were folded into special drawers. Wealthier women had them laundered discreetly. Poorer women washed them in the same water they used for dishes, if they were lucky enough to have cloths at all. For those who bled heavily or irregularly, doctors might prescribe rest, cod liver oil, or, no joke, light horseback riding. But God forbid you exercise too hard, or your uterus might prolapse from the strain. Yes, the roaming womb theory still had fans. And corsets? Don't get started. Tightly laced corsets were believed to support a woman's organs, but in practice they compressed the torso and shifted the uterus in ways no organ ever requested. Historians still argue whether corsets caused miscarriages or merely made existing conditions worse. Either way, you try taking a deep breath in one and see how long it lasts. Pregnancy was barely discussed in polite company. Expecting mothers were referred to as in confinement. No glowing maternity photos here, just months spent indoors away from prying eyes. Even Queen Victoria herself was rarely seen in public during her pregnancies. You imagine her on a velvet chaise staring blankly at a portrait of herself, wondering when she'd be allowed to move again. Still, when labor began, things got very real very fast. You're led into a bedroom where a woman grips a carved bedpost while her maid fans her with a stiff paper. Midwives still attended births, but now more and more physicians, male physicians, began stepping in. Armed with chloroform and the authority of the medical school, they brought both comfort and confusion. Chloroform, first used in childbirth in the 1840s, was a game changer. Queen Victoria famously used it for her 8th child, making it socially acceptable for others. But there was pushback. Some clergymen argued that women should suffer in childbirth as Eve had. Others worried it dulled maternal instinct. You sigh, always an opinion, rarely asked of the person actually giving birth. After delivery, the baby was washed, powdered, and wrapped in layers of cotton and lace. Baptism was swift, postpartum care limited. Some women were encouraged to get up and walk too soon. Others were confined for weeks, fed beef tea and milk pudding, and kept away from cold drafts, which were thought to cause womb chills. You wrap your shawl a little tighter. One odd trend among the upper class: lying in hospitals, where women were sequestered during late pregnancy. These institutions varied wildly in quality. Some were clean and staffed by compassionate midwives. Others, not so much. Infection was rampant. Puerperal fever claimed many mothers, and it wasn't until much later that people realized you should probably wash your hands between patients. Shocking, really. On the other end of the spectrum, poor women gave birth at home, often alone or with a neighbor's help. Some couldn't afford cloths and bled onto straw or old sacks. The resilience required is staggering. Menstrual cures flooded the market during this time. Bottles of Dr. Pierce's favorite prescription promised to regulate your cycle and tone your uterus. Ingredients included alcohol, opium, and whatever else was lying around the apothecary. Not helpful, but definitely relaxing. You end your evening with a stroll through a women's apothecary tucked between a tea shop and a corset tailor. Shelves of glass bottles glitter in the gaslight. Angelica tincture, pennyroyal drops, iron tablets wrapped in brown paper. A girl whispers to the clerk, who nods and discreetly wraps her purchase in tissue and string. Some things never change. Outside, a lamplighter passes. the streets are slick with mist. Inside a curtained window, a mother cradles her newborn while sipping broth. In another room, a girl folds her flannel pads with quiet precision. There are no Instagram posts, no hashtags. Just centuries of women doing what they've always done. Making do. Stitching comfort where they can. And as the gaslight flickers low, you realize, for all the prudery and perfume, Victorian women knew their bodies well. They had to, because no one else was going to speak for them. You crouch near a smoky fire, wrapped in a fur-lined shawl that smells of pine sap and cedar. The stars stretch across a black sky above, and in the circle of flickering flame and soft conversation, you sit among elders of a First Nations tribe. This isn't a single story. It's a mosaic of traditions, passed down orally by indigenous communities across North America. From the Inuit in the north to the Navajo in the deserts, every region has its own way of tending to menstruation, pregnancy, and birth, always rooted in nature, balance, and ancestral reverence. A grandmother is speaking, her voice calm, firm, and slow like river ice. She explains how women in her tribe used layers of soft moss for menstrual pads, changed and cleaned near the water with cedar ash. Some used the fibrous inner bark of trees like birch or juniper, folded into pouches and worn under buckskin skirts. You run your fingers over a piece, light, dry, surprisingly soft, and fully biodegradable. Period huts existed in some tribes, not as shaming spaces, but as sanctuaries. Places where women gathered, bled, rested, and reconnected. Some called it their moon time, a rhythm tied to nature, not something to be hidden. You hear soft laughter from the hut nearby and wonder how different modern life might feel if menstruation were considered sacred again. In the Great Plains, women use sage, yarrow, and sweetgrass to ease cramps. In the Pacific Northwest, salmon oil and hot stones were part of the healing ritual. The details vary, but the pattern is the same. Tend the body with what the land gives, listen to the cycle of the earth. Historians still argue whether this constituted formal medicine or folk tradition, but to the women who lived it, it was simply life. When it came to pregnancy, the community leaned in. There were no baby shower registries, just shared meals, gentle songs, and protective bundles tucked into cedar boxes. Midwives often learned from their mothers, who learned from theirs. They knew which teas to brew for nausea, which roots to chew to ease labor, which stories to tell when fear crept in. You sip from a small birch cup filled with wild mint and feel it warm you from within. You watch as a pregnant woman is gifted a handmade cradle board wrapped in beadwork and lined with soft fur. She will carry her child on her back in this, wrapped snug and upright. It's practical and beautiful, part of everyday life and sacred rite all at once. Some tribes believed babies chose when and to whom they would be born. Dreams were watched carefully. One woman dreams of eagles and her grandmother smiles, nodding slowly. "O warrior soul," she whispers. Another dreams of water and is told her child will be a healer. Science or spirit, it doesn't matter. The feeling in the circle is always the same: reverence, readiness. Birth happens near the fire, in the open air, or under a hide shelter. No hospital gowns, no sterile gloves, just hands, song, and smoke. The mother kneels or squats while the midwife offers cedar tea and chants protection. Some tribes placed red ochre markings on the ground or on the mother's skin to shield her from spiritual harm. The baby is greeted with the scent of sweetgrass and the low murmur of the midwife's welcome. The umbilical cord is dried and stored in a small pouch, sometimes worn around the baby's neck for protection. The placenta may be buried beneath a favorite tree in the direction of the rising sun, or in the spot where the child first kicked inside the womb. Every choice carries meaning. Postpartum care is gentle and constant. The mother is bathed in warm water infused with herbs and surrounded by women who feed her, brush her hair, and whisper memories of their own births. There's no rush to bounce back, only space to become mother, child, family. As the night deepens, you hear a lullaby in a language not spoken in textbooks, but carried in breath and bone. A grandmother sings to a baby wrapped tightly in a cradleboard, rocking gently while she strokes the tiny forehead. The fire glows lower now, but no one seems cold. Outside the lodge, the world sleeps under the stars. Inside, stories pass from elder to child. Not just tales, but tools. Knowledge hidden in rhythm and metaphor. Not archived, but alive. You pull your shawl tighter and listen. And as the hush settles around you like snow, you understand. This knowledge has survived storms, migrations, colonizers, and centuries. Not because it was written, but because it was needed. Because it was true. The air smells faintly of antiseptic and steel. You're standing in a makeshift tent near the edge of a battlefield. The year is somewhere between 1914 and 1945, depending on where your boots land, and the noise of war hums constantly in the background. But inside this canvas-covered room, there's another kind of urgency unfolding. Managing menstruation, pregnancy, and birth in wartime. Welcome to the world of triage, rationed pads, and babies born beneath bomb raids. A nurse in a crisp uniform wipes sweat from her brow with the back of her gloved hand. She's just finished delivering a baby in a field hospital. Not her first, and certainly not her last. You look around at the neatly organized supplies: cloth, thread, iodine, morphine, if they're lucky, and a drawer labeled simply pads. These are made from tightly folded bandage gauze or cotton batting, wrapped in old linens. Tampons exist, but are rarely available outside urban areas. Period care on the front is DIY or don't even ask, and that's just the beginning. During World War I, most women in uniform weren't even issued menstrual supplies. Nurses cut up old uniforms. Factory workers on the home front used newspaper stuffed in bloomers. By World War II, mass production of sanitary pads became more widespread, but still limited. Kotex, for instance, was originally made from surplus cellulose bandages developed during World War I. You touch one of the bulky, cotton-wrapped rectangles and can almost hear the rustle of every movement. Women working in ammunition factories, nicknamed munitionettes in the UK, dealt with heavy metal exposure, which affected fertility and cycle regularity. Some reported skipped periods, others bled more frequently. The connection, still debated. Historians argue whether war conditions or chemical exposure caused these shifts, but the reality was undeniable. Stress, danger, and uncertainty took their toll. Back at the field hospital, a Red Cross nurse comforts a young soldier's wife who's just gone into labor. There's no birthing suite, no warm bath, no doula. Just a cot, boiled instruments, and a hand to hold. She's lucky to even have a midwife present. Many wartime births occurred in homes, shelters, or alone. One woman in London reportedly gave birth in the aisle of a bombed-out tube station, wrapped in her coat, while fire crews scrambled outside. And yet, babies were born. Hundreds of thousands of them. The baby booms didn't begin after the wars, they were seeded during them. In bomb shelters. On base housing floors. In refugee camps. Hope growing stubbornly where logic said it shouldn't. Pregnancy during wartime was, to put it mildly, complicated. Rations meant mothers often lacked access to fresh food, prenatal vitamins, or even consistent rest. One French woman describes her pregnancy soup as little more than thin broth and stale bread. Yet midwives carried on, using stethoscopes made of wood and their own experience to guide each birth. Maternity homes sprung up across Europe and the US, offering sanctuary to expecting mothers whose husbands were away, or whose pregnancies were unwed and therefore socially volatile. These homes varied in warmth. Some offered gentle support. Others imposed strict, even cruel regimes of silence and shame. It depended on the time, the place, and the woman's luck. Meanwhile, a menstruation remained a challenge, especially for women in service. WACS, Women's Army Corps, and WAVES, Women Accepted for Volunteer Emergency Service in the U.S., dealt with their periods in silence, often rationing supplies or sharing among their units. Borrowing a pad was both a practical request and a deep show of solidarity. At night in the barracks or shelters, women whispered tips. Boil your cloth pads, wear darker skirts, walk carefully. And always, always have a backup handkerchief. In some places, wartime innovation helped. Disposable pads, elastic belts, and eventually adhesive strips were introduced and tested. But adoption was slow, and availability even slower. War doesn't wait for your cycle. As the war drew on, maternity nurses worked overtime. There were entire hospitals where birth records were stamped with the same day, when a ship returned or leave was granted. You leaf through a file dated March 1945 and see 10 births recorded in one 24-hour period. Reunion babies, tired mothers, some with wedding rings, others without. And through it all, a quiet strength. You step outside the hospital tent, blinking into the gray dusk. 2 women are laughing, sitting on crates, swapping stories over tea made from army rations. One jokes about giving birth with a helmet on, the other nods. At least the baby didn't cry until after the siren. And you realize these were the women who kept the world going while it tried to tear itself apart. Who bled and birthed in foxholes, factories, and blackout curtained flats. Who did not pause history but moved quietly through it, one contraction at a time. You curl up under a soft blanket in your own time, phone dimmed, fan humming. But as your eyes close, you realize many of the modern ideas buzzing on your social feed, syncing with the moon, cloth pads, home births, herbal teas for cramps, are not new. They're echoes. Tonight, you trace those whispers to the present, wondering how much of today's wellness culture is rooted in ancient wisdom and how much is rebranded guesswork with better lighting. You scroll past a post about seed cycling to balance hormones and pause. Ancient women, you recall, also tracked cycles by the moon. They just didn't call it biohacking. A woman in the Andes laid corn kernels in rows to map her bleeding days. Another in rural China used red silk knots to track fertility. Whether for health or harmony, the cycle was a map, a pattern to understand, not a flaw to fix. Today, cloth pads are marketed as eco-conscious and empowering, but for centuries they were the only option. Your great-grandmother probably boiled hers in a pot no one dared use for soup. Now you order yours in pastel colors embroidered with moons and affirmations. Progress, yes, but also a return. And what about birth? You tap through videos of home births lit by fairy lights and essential oils. You hear affirmations whispered over bathtub water and doulas pressing warm towels to brows. It's beautiful, it's healing, it's familiar. Birth stools, water births, mother-centered care. These are not innovations, they're restorations. Medieval, indigenous, Egyptian, Aztec, Ayurvedic, every culture you visited held pieces of this. Today's midwife uses latex gloves and ultrasound, but her instincts, old as moss. Some say the placenta is sacred, others grind it into pills. But that's nothing new. Ancient Chinese texts called it a life-restoring tonic. African traditions buried it to root the baby to the earth. In Polynesia, it was wrapped in tapa cloth and returned to the sea. Now we freeze it, or frame it, or post about it. Even language cycles back. Moon time, red tent, honoring your flow. These phrases might seem trendy, but they're echoes of stone huts, firelight, and whispered stories. You stop at a video titled Womb Wisdom and raise an eyebrow. A woman in flowing linen talks about awakening your inner cycles, and while the hashtags are new, the feeling isn't. Women have always tried to understand their bodies on their own terms, especially when the world refused to. Of course, not all natural practices are wise. Crocodile dung pessaries? Hard pass? Mercury pills from the 1800s? Let's not revisit those, but even flawed traditions tell a truth. People have always searched for ways to ease pain, prevent suffering, and pass knowledge forward. The scientific community now validates some of what your ancestors simply knew. Raspberry leaf for labor, proven benefits. Clove oil for cramps, backed by studies. Warm compresses, gentle movement, stress relief. They all echo through the centuries. Even period tracking apps, digital and data-rich, are just modern versions of knotted strings, wax calendars, and inked notches on bones. You smile at the thought. Thousands of years of technological evolution, and we still mark X's on a chart to understand ourselves. You look around your room. No incense, no shrine, no midwife, but your heating pad hums, your herbal tea steams, and your playlist of thunderstorm sounds loops quietly in the background. The tools have changed. The need hasn't. And maybe that's the real story. The body remembers. The body adapts, whispers, cycles. And so do you. The room is quiet now. The past has unspooled itself like thread through your fingers. Soft, coarse, golden, frayed. You've walked beside women who bled in silence and who birthed by firelight, who passed their secrets hand to hand, wrapped in cloth, tied in knots, carved into bone. You've watched moss become pad, oil become balm, lullaby become ritual. You've heard how the same hope murmured beneath Egyptian linen also whispered in a London alley during the Blitz, and how the same strength that gripped a birthing rope in a rainforest moved into an enamel-tiled labor ward 1,000 years later. Time folds gently here. You are not alone. You are a link in the chain. Maybe you felt lost in your own cycle, its irregularities, its weight, its timing. Maybe you felt the ache of an unexplained cramp, the chill of a doctor's indifference, or the strange blend of awe and fear that comes with pregnancy. But you are not the first, and you are never without company. Let yourself drift now. Your body knows what it's doing. It always has. The fire's low, the linen is folded, the whispers have grown softer, and you, held by the long memory of those who came before, are safe to sleep.